Okay, so let's start off with a very basic introduction. Introduce yourself, introduce the lab, and talk a little bit about the work you guys do.
Sure. So my name is Karen Jesch. I am a fourth year PhD student at Boston College, and I do my research with the Canine Cognition Center, which is a very fun way of saying that I get to hang out with dogs for my job. We founded our lab in 2019, and we're really interested in asking a whole bunch of different questions about dogs and learning what can those questions tell us about dogs, about domestication, and also about ourselves.
Yeah, so on your website, you guys talk about like what domestication actually is, kind of laying it out versus what a lot of people would probably think it is. Can you sort of lay out like what is domestication and how do you guys go about studying it?
Sure. So domestication is a process, and I'm sorry if you can hear my dog playing in the background, but it's a process that happens to a species over many, many, many years of careful selection. It's a process of making an animal easy for us to work with and keeping it as pets or as workers, and really just having them be ones that live with us without us being afraid of being eaten like by a lion in the middle of the night or something like that. Domestication is when we're specifically selecting for tameness. And we'll compare dogs who are domesticated species to other animals like dingoes that are undomesticated canids and the cognitive abilities of wolves, which are super undomesticated, to kind
Hmm.
of learn what happened throughout that process. What's different between dogs, dingoes, and wolves? And what does that tell us about how domestication might have changed how animals think?
You guys talked a little bit too about like humans can also be domesticated.
Yeah, there's a really interesting theory. I'm not super on the up and up on it, but there's a theory that humans kind of domesticated ourselves,
Oh.
which is super interesting. And if you look at, the qualities that make an animal domesticated, we kind of check those all off. So over many generations, humans selected favor, mates, partners that were more pro-social, that were more cooperative, and that were less aggressive. And throughout this process of kind of selecting our partners in this manner, we've created a species,
Yeah.
us, that are not super reactive, that like to work together, and that get along pretty easily with others of our species.
Do 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 like does the research do people think that part of that was like a evolved with dogs as like as dogs and other species are being domesticated that we are also starting to domesticate in like a similar way?
Yeah, it's a really good question. This human domestication probably started, a lot longer ago than the dog domestication happened. Dog domestication was probably, 14, 20-ish thousand years ago.
Oh,
Human
okay.
domestication might have been more like 600,000 years ago. So
Oh,
definitely not at
wow.
the same time, but there is a lot of evolving that we did alongside humans.
Interesting. So, okay. So for the dogs in that like 20 to 14,000 range, what are the things that are like looked for as to determine when that date is? Is it just looking at like, oh, we dug a dog up with some humans that we found, or is it like you're looking at the like the dingoes, for instance, and knowing roughly when dingoes and dogs broke off?
Yeah, you're kind of right on the money. It's a mix of a lot of things. It's a mix of looking at other what we call extant, which is to say not extinct species, but also archaeological records. We learn a lot from genetics, which is way outside my own wheelhouse. I think that the people who look at genetics are like superheroes, but it's beyond me. But a lot of genetics information helps too. Yeah.
So domestication will like change the genes that are expressed because you're controlling for this or for that or whatever gene would cause them to be more wild would get kind of weeded out over time.
Right. And we can actually see that in some experiments going on now. Have you ever heard of like the Russian foxes?
No.
So this was an experiment that was done in Russia with foxes, as the name kind of implies. And it started with like fur foxes.
Okay.
which were being bred for their pelts and were obviously not super happy to be around humans because foxes are wild animals. And some researchers started going, what happens if we start breeding them just for tameness? We're not looking at anything else. We're just looking at, will this fox, bite me if I put my hand near it? And the answer for a lot of those foxes was yes, but for a lot of them, it was more like not as super scary, aggression, but more just kind of fear. And so they started breeding those foxes together that were less aggressive than others. And over the course of just a couple of generations, they started seeing foxes that started wagging their tails when experimenters came by, that
Whoa.
started vocalizing, that started rolling over for belly rubs. And one other cool thing is we started seeing byproducts of evolution. So we started seeing curly tails, floppy ears, piebald coats with like white splotches on them, overbites, underbites, all kinds of really crazy things that started happening just because they selected for tameness.
Just in a couple generations.
Yeah, I don't remember I think it's like 7 generations or something like that. They were able to start seeing like
Wow.
a distinct split between the ones that they were selecting for tameness versus the ones that they were keeping as their control.
So how many years do foxes live on average? Like 15, 20,
Who knows?
25?
Probably, I mean, it depends on whether they're wild or, captive.
Yeah.
But I think the average lifespan for a fox is something like 4 years for a red fox.
4 years.
It's
So
super short.
so in less than 3 decades, they were able to start seeing all of these changes.
Yeah, there's a really great book about it. It's called How to Tame a Fox and Build a Dog.
Oh,
And it's about exactly that. It's about the Russian fox experiment and how that kind of tells us how do dogs come to be. And also there's like some really interesting like political intrigue going on because I think that they like weren't super supposed to be doing this kind of experiment at the time, just because
why
of the
not?
political climate going on in Russia. So they kind of had to be like, oh yes, we're doing foxes for pelts. I'll double check that for you, but it was really interesting.
Why would they? That would be a weird thing to be controversial at the time, unless they're like protected or something. Or did it have
Yeah,
something to do with like their wolf populations? I know they've had issues with those in Russia.
yeah, I'm not super familiar with the wolf issues in Russia. I imagine they kind of mirror the, issues that they had in Yellowstone where
Yeah.
wolves were pests for agricultural workers. But yeah.
Yeah, my understanding, I do know one person who lived in Russia from college, and they had talked about, I guess in like remote parts of Russia, they get like these super packs of wolves that are
Mm.
quite a lot bigger than your average pack. And obviously wolves are very smart and very coordinated. And if you double
Yeah.
their numbers, the amount of things that they can do and go after double. And you have
Right.
these very small remote Russian villages that's a couple hundred people versus a couple hundred wolves in the middle of the night, and it can be a real problem for them.
Oh, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So does it kind of work in reverse too? Of like, if I were to take, a domestic dog and then just release them into the wild, assuming they survived for, 5, 6, 7 generations, would they start to rewild themselves on their own?
That's a really interesting question. Sort of, not really.
Okay.
We do see there are populations, actually, the vast majority of dogs in the world do not live in houses like the dogs that
Oh,
you and I have. I think it's something like 70% of dogs in the world are technically like free ranging. Um,
70%.
yeah, it's like a lot of them. Let me just double check it.
Oh
Let's
my
see.
gosh. Would that
Yeah,
would
an estimated 75 to 85% of the world's dog population is considered free ranging.
Oh my gosh.
I
So
know.
so is that like a dog that just like maybe has a home, or but like you see on the street?
Yeah, that would be like dogs that just kind of live on the streets.
Oh
They,
my word.
and there are some researchers, we don't do it, unfortunately. I wish we did, it would be so cool. But there are some researchers who do comparisons between the free-ranging dogs and dogs that live like as pets. And they do find some differences between them. They obviously have to be kind of better at reading people because when the
Mm,
consequences are so much more severe. If
Yeah.
you get near someone who doesn't want you near them, you'll get rocks thrown at you. Um, but there are still, they're able to understand human pointing cues.
Mm.
They're able to be tested in kind of the same way as our own pet dogs with like behavioral test batteries, which are basically when we do like 10 different studies in a row. They have what we call plasticity, which is like flexibility in behavior, in their ability to do things like follow human pointing. And a lot of that is modulated by age. So they're really good at understanding humans and will adjust their behavioral responses according to what they can tell a human wants.
So what is human pointing?
Human pointing is it's just what it sounds like. It's if you point at a location, dogs are really good at following that.
Gotcha.
It's something that kind of sets them apart from like chimpanzees, which are our closest relatives.
Mm.
Chimpanzees are kind of terrible at following human pointing. They can
Really?
learn, but it takes them like a whole bunch of trials and training. Whereas if you look at like an 8-week-old puppy that hasn't been exposed to a whole bunch of human pointing, maybe, and you put, two cups and you hide a treat underneath one of them, and then you spread the cups out and you point at the cup that has a treat in it, the 8-week-old puppy is pretty good at finding where the treat is hidden.
Do you guys have any idea why that would be?
It's something that kind of came from domestication
Okay.
because wolves are able to do it, but not as high of a rate as, our own pet dogs are.
Okay.
There is some, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the scientific community because we're interested not only in, why do dogs follow pointing, but what kind of pointing do they follow? Is
Mm.
it, crossbody where you're pointing with the opposite arm? Is it the same side? Is it close to the thing? Is it far from the thing? Is it momentary? Is it sustained? But really, we kind of think that it happened because we've predisposed dogs to seek guidance from humans. And in fact, if they will be able to smell or see where the treat is, if they know from their eyes that the treat is in the cup in the left and you point at the one on the right, some dogs will get tripped up and they'll go to the one on the right.
Really? So there's
Yeah.
it's not even just like a understanding, it's even like a respect thing of like where they put your input on something versus like what their own senses are telling them.
It could be. Yeah. It's a really funny study. It's called oh gosh, I can't remember what it's called. Um, oh, it's gonna bother me. Um, but yeah, we don't really know, is it a respect thing? Is it a, over reliance on human thing is kind of the
Hmm.
leading theory. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's so fascinating. And wolves can kind of understand it as well.
Yeah, wolves are decent at following pointing, but they're nowhere near as good as dogs at it.
Would wolves come, I mean, you may not know this, but like would they come be comparable to like the chimps?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
As far it's crazy to me that a chimp would understand it less because my understanding is like a lot of the way we communicate with chimps is just like sign language in general.
Yeah, that kind of came from some of the like early comparative studies that were looking at whether or not we could teach animals language.
Yeah.
A lot of those studies have some pretty strong methodological concerns as well as some ethical barriers.
Yeah, we covered
Um,
one about with dolphins on the podcast many
yeah,
episodes ago.
yeah, I'm familiar with the one. So that kind of field of work has been abandoned a little bit. No one's really doing chimps and sign language anymore. Some of them are doing like symbols,
Hmm.
where they'll have like a big board and they'll have different symbols, and the chimp might point at a symbol that's associated with like a banana. But then what you find is that they just kind of point at the banana over and over and over and over and over again because they really want that banana,
I don't blame them. Bananas are
right?
delicious.
Like if
So
I had a sign that I could just point at and a banana would be brought to me, I'd be pressing that like 8 times a day.
are dogs good with symbols at all?
Dogs are pretty good with symbols, and that's how we teach them, right? I mean, us saying, puppy sit, that's kind
Hmm.
of a symbol. It's just a verbal one.
That's true.
And you can teach them, touch this red button and I'll give you a treat. So they're pretty decent at it.
You guys do a lot of work with like working dogs, right? And like consulting on like a lot of those dogs that need to be pretty highly trained.
Yeah, we've started doing a lot of work. We collaborate with some service dog organizations and also do some theoretical work where we just kind of read a whole bunch of papers and say, this is what makes a service dog important. And then we will also design experiments and we'll compare service dogs and pet dogs, or even service dogs and human kids to kind of learn
Oh.
what is it that makes a service dog kind of stand out.
And what have you guys found so far?
See, I have to think about what's been published and what
Okay.
hasn't been published because I don't want to
Yeah,
give you
don't.
any cool spoiler alerts. Um, let's see. We do know that so service dogs are, pretty exceptional, right?
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
taught to do things that your average pet dog cannot do. And we know that because if you look at even service dog organizations where they have a dedicated breeding program, they have thousands of volunteers that take the puppies into their home and raise them and take them places and socialize them. And they have professional trainers that, do the dedicated service dog training. And even those organizations that this is their entire purpose is to raise and train service dogs only really have about a 50% success rate.
Oh,
So that means
really?
that if you get 100 puppies that are purpose bred for being service dogs, you send them to trained volunteers who teach them everything that they need to know. You send them off to the professional trainers. Only about 50 of those 100 dogs will actually end up graduating. The rest of them will go off to live like as pets.
Whoa.
I know. And so this tells us a couple of things. First, it tells us that service dogs have a really hard job that your average pet dog can't really do.
Mm,
And it also tells us that there's a need for us to figure out what is it that makes a dog a good service dog, because that's thousands of dollars and hours that are going into those dogs to not make
yeah.
it. So what can we do to kind of help support their training? Is there anything that might make a service dog more exceptional at being a service dog that we can help support? Are there early interventions that we can do? And so some of our researchers in our team have been trying to answer that question
Mm,
by, comparing them on like inferential reasoning tasks. So, if I show you that one object works to get a treat and one object doesn't work, you're going to pick the one that works pretty much
mm,
every time. Inferential reasoning is a little bit different. Inferential reasoning is if I show you one object that doesn't work, and then I show you that object that doesn't work with a new object together, and that does work, are you able to figure out that it's the new object that helped?
mm.
And so we're doing some analysis right now to figure out not only are general service dog candidates better at pet dogs at doing inferential reasoning, but maybe being able to do that is what sets apart the dogs that succeed from the ones that, get career changed.
Does it
It's a very polite way of saying fail.
get laid off?
Yeah.
Are there like certain breeds that you guys are finding that, or if it's 50%, I would imagine then it's like it's kind of like breed agnostic in a way.
Yeah, so most service dog organizations use Labradors, Golden
Yeah.
Retrievers, and Lab Golden Crosses. There are a couple that might use like German Shepherds or Standard Poodles, but those are the ones that are kind of found to be the most successful.
I mean, just off the rip, do you think it could be like a situation of sort of like when we're picking special forces, if we like imagine these dogs are like the special forces of dogs, where like a lot of the recruitment and the trialing isn't even just like it's not to see if you're fit or not to see if you're skilled, it's just to see like if you have like the intangible qualities that are needed to do the job. And like sort of if it's 50%, like that kind of feels like a special forces attrition rate to me.
Yeah, it kind of is. You'll have, even within puppies from the same litter, you'll have some of those dogs go on to
Mm,
graduate and some of those dogs go on to become very much beloved pets.
yeah.
So what is it about those dogs that make them stand out? And that's one of the questions that our lab is trying to answer.
My mom, one of her favorite stories ever is my parents have always been lab owners. They've had
Yeah.
labs for my entire life. And my mom had a dog named Molly before I was born, I think she was watching like Homeward Bound or
Oh my
something.
gosh, I love that movie.
Heartbreak. And she gets to the end when Shadow comes over there and she's
Yeah,
just sobbing and just
yeah.
all by herself in the home. And Molly gets up off of the couch and goes into the other room and goes into the bathroom, and my mom hears some rattling, and then she comes back with a box of tissues
Oh my
for
gosh.
my mom, went into the cabinet, got the tissues, and brought them to my mom with obviously no training. Like my mom didn't train
Right.
her like every time I cry, bring me tissues. And that just made my mom sob even harder. And
Right.
has all these stories about Molly of like how smart she was and just able to figure things out and just you couldn't fool her with anything. Like you could just throw a ball into a high grass and she'd go out and she'd find it like that.
Yeah.
Similarly, Lily, who are one of our current dogs, she's athletic, but she's not the sharpest tool in the shed.
Yeah.
She's easily fooled. And, they're both labs. It's
Right. Yeah, you
whatever
get the
that thing
same kind
is.
of dog, but some of them just have that something that sets them apart from the rest. And
Mm,
so, is there a way for us to figure out maybe earlier on in the process? Because a lot of these dogs don't end up getting released until they're like a year and a half old.
mm,
So, maybe we can find out when they're 6 months old which dog
right.
has it and which dog doesn't. And not necessarily then say, okay, the 6 month old puppy is going to be released from the program, but maybe there's some kind of intervention that we can do with that 6 month old puppy. Maybe we can do something that will help them get that special something before they're done developing to
Mm.
increase their chances of succeeding.
That's so fascinating. That's so fascinating. And so how do you guys even go about like okay, you have this thing that you guys want to study. How do you go about developing these like almost like personality tests for
Yeah,
dogs?
it's one of my favorite parts of my job, is figuring out how do we test them. A lot of times we actually start off by reading human literature, seeing what they do with like
Mm,
human kids that are maybe infants that don't have language yet or are 3 to 5 years old. And we'll kind of develop some of those tests to make sense for a dog.
mm,
Sometimes we'll look at what other dog researchers have done and say, you know what, there's a step missing here that I'm going to add in. But we have a wonderful pool of participants that bring their dogs into our lab. So we'll kind of come up with whatever method we want to do. And we'll have maybe 5 dogs come in and do what we call pilot the study. They'll come in and we'll do the study as we intend, and maybe we'll tweak a couple of things on the fly, and we'll sit down and go, okay, did this seem to work? Did it tell us what we wanted to tell? Or maybe were the dogs distracted because too many people were in the room? Or
mm,
maybe there was just no way that they were going to press this button no matter what we did. And so we'll go back and kind of tweak it from there. So we've had some studies that involve like one of my very first studies from when I was, a baby PhD student, didn't quite know how to do the best experimental design yet. I had this massive, like 7 foot by 4 foot cardboard wall with like cutouts in it that you could like reach your hands through and like windows so that you could open it up so that your face could be seen or not. And that worked out okay, but it didn't quite answer the question that we wanted. Sometimes our studies are as simple as we have 2 cups and we see which cup they go to after we do some kind of demonstration. So it really, really depends. It's a lot of reading. We'll
mm,
spend a couple of months just doing reading and trying to figure out what do scientists do when they want to measure something like resilience,
mm,
or inferential reasoning. And then we'll kind of tweak it for dogs, which is hard because we can't explain to them which one do you think works. We have to figure out how do we have them choose. Then we'll practice it. We'll go back to the drawing board, change a couple things, and eventually we'll have something that we can actually present to a whole bunch of dogs to do our study.
mm. Do you think that dogs have a like a consciousness in similar like way to we do of that they're sort of working through problems in their head and like reasoning through them?
That's a really good question, and it's one that a lot of scientists kind of butt heads on.
Okay.
Um, because, historically, when it comes to things like, does this animal have consciousness?
Mm.
Um, a lot of times humans like to kind of move the goalposts. So they'll say, you only have to meet this one thing. And then
Yeah.
we'll start seeing like an octopus meet that thing. And we'll go, actually, you also need this other thing. But we do see that dogs are capable of something called metacognition, which is thinking about how you think and realizing, I have gaps in my knowledge and working to kind of
Mm.
solve those gaps in your knowledge.
Mm.
That's something that some people have proposed might be some part of consciousness.
Hmm.
There's some work that shows that dogs are kind of self-aware, that they're able to recognize themselves compared to other dogs.
Hmm.
They understand how their size affects things, and they have a lot of other cognitive traits ranging from, memory to, a gajillion other things,
Right.
basically. So I like to think yes, I would hope so. I look at all of the dogs that I've had and I see a bunch of individuals. Scientifically, some people say yes, some people say no. It's kind of
Hmm.
hard to say.
I mean, it's even hard to, how do you even study that in humans? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
quantifying consciousness in ourselves is hard enough, let
It's
alone,
such a big picture question.
right.
It's hard to come up with. I mean, how would you study that in a human? You might ask
Yeah.
them questions about, themselves and about how they separate themselves from other people, but you can't really do that for an animal.
Right. So, what are like, what are some basic, like fundamental, this is how a dog and a human communicate with each other the most effectively? Like, I saw there was stuff with gaze, there was stuff with eye
Yeah.
contact. Like, what are the basic things that people should understand when their dog is communicating with them, and then cues that they're giving off to their dog and what their dog is making of that?
Totally. Gaze and eye contact are, I think, one of the most important things to dog-human communication. Especially given humans are actually pretty bad at reading dog body language. There
Hmm.
was a really interesting study that took videos of a dog in like happy situations where they were shown like their leash or some food, and some videos of dog like that same dog in unhappy situations, like when they were presented with their nemesis, a cat. Um, and then the authors like removed the background of the video and so that you could only see the dog and showed it to people and asked, what is this dog feeling? And people were not good at it.
Really?
They were really good at it when the context was included. But once you take away that context or even swap the context so that an unhappy dog looked like they saw a treat, people would say that dog is happy. So people are not as good as they think that they are when it comes to reading dog emotions and dog body language. But
Hmm.
one thing that dogs and humans are really good at is just looking at each other. You see it when there's problems that dogs face that they want, they can't figure out how to access their ball from underneath the couch. They'll look at a person. And in fact, when humans and dogs make eye contact, there's some evidence that suggests that that triggers what's called an oxytocin gaze positive loop. It's
Hmm.
the same kind of thing that happens when a mom looks at her infant.
Hmm.
Oxytocin, which is that kind of happy love hormone, gets released in both individuals. So when you and your dog look at each other and gaze into each other's eyes lovingly, it really does make both of you kind of feel attached to each other.
Yeah, that's so when you're, trying to communicate with the dog, first thing is to make that eye contact.
Yeah, you can also talk in what's called dog-directed speech. It's,
Oh, okay.
that like, hi puppy, you're such a cute puppy. Look at you. Hi there.
Yeah.
Look at your big eyes and your floppy ears. And my dog just came over to me. But dogs really like that tone of voice, that dog-directed speech. It makes them
Mhm.
pay attention to you more. It makes them engage with you. Some people have suggested that it means that they'll, follow cues a little bit better once you start talking to them in that way, using those
Mm.
dog-directed speech. Um, and humans use it too to kind of enhance their communication. It increases attention in both of us. So making eye contact with your dog, talking to them like they're a baby,
Mhm.
are actually like scientifically supported ways of enhancing that communication and bond with your dog.
Is there bad eye contact? Because I know with some animals, like if you make direct eye contact and you position yourself, sometimes some animals will see that as like a confrontational thing.
Right, like a threat.
Yeah.
There's certainly, I'm not going to come out here and say all eye contact is good because
Hmm.
I've had dogs that were not super friendly look at me and something about their face just kind of makes my heart drop a little bit.
Mm.
But for the most part, when it comes between you and your dog, making eye contact isn't really a threat.
Okay.
They'll use it sometimes, but it's always associated with other things like, hard face, tight lips, ears back, teeth
Mhm.
bared. But if you have just your dog lounging around the house and you're just kind of lounging around, there's nothing wrong with looking in their eyes.
Gotcha. Is there anything like on top of that to know about like a dog? Like obviously like the tail wagging versus, straight out or um, when they kind of hind up sometimes. I've always wondered like our dogs sometimes when we go to play, like we get them really riled up and they'll just start like barking and like ha at each other and you're like, "Oh
Yeah,
my
doing
gosh,
like
they
the
hate each other, but they're
play.
just playing."
Yeah, I call it when my dog does that with other dogs, I call it bitey face.
Yes.
But they're really good at inhibiting themselves. And when it comes to dog on dog play, I mean, they're the experts. They
Mm,
are really good at, shaking off right before it's time to change activity or doing that play bow to kind of reassure them, like, hey, this is all a game, I promise.
mm,
They're really, really experts at communicating with each other. Humans understanding those body language cues, like I said, not as exceptional. But there are things that you can do to kind of bolster your bilingualism when it comes to dogs. You can learn more about their body language skills. You can watch more videos. You can
mhm,
read, articles about what is it that makes a dog happy versus threatening.
mm.
So it's a skill like any other.
I've always heard with cats that the meow is, and then maybe this might not be true, you can correct me if you know, but I've heard with cats that meow is very much something that they use to communicate with kittens and that they communicate with us using meows because more out of like frustration because how they communicate as adults is not something we can pick up on. Is there like a communication cue your dog gives you where you can be like they're trying to tell me something and I'm just not pick like a baby obviously would just start crying and then you got to figure
Right.
why are they crying, what's going on? And my cousin just had a baby and she told me that like a few months in and you start to be able to tell cries apart from each other of I know
Yeah.
this cry means I'm hungry, this one means I just pooped my pants, like I know what the
Right.
different ones are.
Yeah, definitely. So you're pretty much right on the money with cats. It does seem like cats is main like meowing is mainly a human-directed vocalization.
Mm,
Dogs don't really have, as far as we know,
okay.
don't really have a vocalization that is specific for humans. And actually, we kind of see that we are in some way almost inhibiting their communication with us, right? Because when you
Oh.
get a puppy, one of the first things that a lot of people teach their dog is don't bark in the house. Especially if you live in an
Mm,
apartment or something, you don't want them bothering the people that live above or below you.
right.
People will relinquish their dogs to shelters because their dog is, vocalizing inappropriately, they'll say.
Mm,
So in some ways, we actually kind of hinder how they communicate to us. But dogs are really, really good at adapting, and they're especially good at adapting to humans. So something like making eye contact with you, or my puppy will paw at me pretty frequently when she wants something. And just like, human parents with their babies, you kind of start
mm,
to learn the signs of your dog. I
mm.
can tell by the way my puppy holds her tail when she needs to poop. And I know when she goes to the door at a certain time of day, that means that she wants to go outside.
Yeah.
Or when she brings a toy over to me, I can tell if she wants to play fetch versus if she just wants to show me something. So we are pretty good at getting to know our individual dogs, and our individual dogs are pretty good at getting to know us.
How does the candid gaze with humans specifically vary between dogs, dingoes, and wolves? Is it sort of like they have that similar ability to like look and connect with us, or do we see that like, you know, like if I'm surrounded by wolves in Russia, for example, and they're coming of like, am I trying to make eye contact to see if I can just get some oxytocin going or
Probably not. If you're surrounded by wolves in Siberia, I might, start thinking some happy memories. But there was some research done actually by my advisor, the PI of our lab, Dr. Angie Johnston, who looked at just that, who looked at dogs, dingoes, and wolves and their origins of dog-human eye contact. And what she did is she basically presented them with a, person and just kind of measured how much they looked at them.
Hmm.
Um, and they, the owners of the dog existed, but the dingoes don't really have an owner, and they compare them to data from wolves. And what they found was they just wanted to see in this, period of being in an enclosure with a human, how much time does this animal spend looking at the human?
Hmm.
And they found that dogs give the most eye contact, wolves give the least, and
Hmm.
dingoes are pretty much right there in the middle. So this tells us that there's something about domestication that means
Hmm.
that, that dog-human bond might have developed in a couple of stages, which would explain why dingoes are kind of in the middle,
Hmm.
um, but also that makes eye contact kind of special for dogs.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, like, how do dingoes kind of get left in like no man's land in the middle of this? Of like, were they just like a failed of we tried to domesticate them and then, it just a different species worked better and we went with that or
Yeah, great question. So dingoes are kind of a hot button topic at the moment, especially in Australia,
Ooh.
where there's a lot of, political stuff going on,
Right,
especially
right.
with, agricultural lobbyists are saying that they're vermin and pests. And
Yeah.
then other people are saying, well, no, they're dogs. And some people are saying they're not dogs at all. Really, the question kind of comes down to what makes a species.
Okay.
Um, and the main answer to that question is can they breed with each other and have offspring that are fertile?
Mm.
And by that definition, dogs, dingoes, and wolves are all the same species. So what happened? Well, we know that
Oh.
around 14-ish thousand years ago, people started living in like camps and settlements. And
Mm.
whenever people start gathering in camps and settlements, they start producing a lot of trash. And when you get trash, you end up getting vermin like rats and,
Ah.
pseudo raccoons and whatever else ended up running around at the time. And when that happened, that creates a really tempting food source for our ancestral wolves. So these ancestral wolves, they probably lived in Asia. They probably lived in packs. They were probably pretty similar to today's gray wolves.
Mm.
And they kind of self-selected the ones that were more tame, like those foxes, the ones that were less afraid of humans, less aggressive towards humans,
Mm.
were able to go kind of closer and eat the refuse. They were able to hunt the animals that were attracted by the trash. And those individuals started breeding together, which created more tame individuals. The ones that
Mm.
didn't, that were less tame, that were more afraid of humans or more aggressive, would breed with each other. And those guys went on and they maintained pretty much the same and created today's gray wolves.
Mm. S- s- s-
So,
Well, so I'm just thinking about like with that Fox study of how much they were able to change in just, 30 years. If you're
right.
talking 14,000 years, like how different are these animals from even what was, 1,000 years ago, much less 14,000 years ago, assuming, domestication's been taking place that entire time.
Right. Well, you have to consider a couple of things, right? First, the foxes were being done by humans. So we were looking at them and saying, these two are the tamest. I'm going to breed them together.
Hmm.
That didn't exactly happen 14,000 years ago.
Okay.
Instead, what ended up happening was they were kind of still mingling with each other. They weren't exactly immediately splitting up and going, this half is more tame, this half is more wild. They're only going to breed with each other. There was still some overlap. Think of it as like a Venn diagram.
Okay.
And then what ended up happening is about 7,000 years ago, so after a really long time of this going on, we started kind of living more alongside them. And then about
Okay.
2,000 years ago, we started really intensely artificially selecting for the ones that we wanted to breed. And that's how we ended up with today's dogs.
Okay.
Now, the dingoes are kind of that 7,000 year ago snapshot. They kind of underwent that self-domestication process, but they weren't artificially selected like dogs were. They ended up being brought to Australia. They're not native there, about 5 to 7-ish thousand years ago.
Hmm.
And then they just kind of hung out in the wild. And so, or more like, 3,500 to 12,000 years ago. It really depends. We're not super sure. But we're able to see that they kind of started rewilding almost into
Hmm.
Australia and
Do we know why they were
having those.
brought if they were just released into the wild?
It's really hard to say. We don't really know if they were completely like released into the wild or maybe some of them, I don't know if they got out ever, but they were never fully domesticated. It could be that maybe they were really good at getting rid of vermin. And so
Hmm.
maybe the seafarers of the time thought, you know what, we're going to bring these guys with us to deal with the vermin. It could be that there was maybe a land bridge and they just kind of walked along that land bridge. There's some genetic evidence that suggests that, and we know that the present day mainlands were extended during the ice ages.
Hmm.
So we
Oh,
don't really
okay.
know exactly how it happened, but we do know that based off of archaeological and genetic data, we can see that they did undergo that unconscious selection, but not that artificial selection that makes them fully domesticated. So if you were to travel back in time 7,000 years, you might see people hanging out with dogs that act and looked a lot like dingoes.
Interesting. Interesting. And okay, this might be a little bit out of the way, but are you familiar with like Colossus, that company's trying to bring back the dire wolf?
Oh, I've heard of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this would be a good question for you. So what they've essentially done is taken the nearest relative, right, and then done some genetic engineering to it and being like, oh, this is a dire wolf, right? But my understanding is that number one, there's just not a lot of actual dire wolf like remains that actually exist,
That's
and
my
it's
understanding
very
too.
few and far between. And similarly, my thought would be, especially with this domestication process, that dire wolves, the real ones, would have like a culture that was passed down from generation to generation, probably through DNA, through genetics, but also through just like, like you said, this self-selection process of whatever their environment is. And so with whatever direwolf you're making today, you can call it a direwolf, but they have no connection to the previous direwolves and no way to learn about how they would have operated in that environment, or, what the, whatever self-selection processes were going on at the time of their extinction. So
Right.
how, from your point of view as a soon to be full-on doctor, like how does that stuff sort of slot in for you guys who study dogs a lot?
Yeah. So my understanding of it, I'm, keeping an eye on this piece, not as a scientist, but just as a dog lover,
Mm,
is that they didn't splice direwolf DNA into gray wolf embryos or anything. My understanding is that they analyzed direwolf DNA, kind of identified what they thought was responsible for some, things that they thought were important to make a direwolf a direwolf.
mm,
And then they edited the gray wolf DNA to kind of match that.
yeah.
So pretty distinct. We also know that dire wolves are not in the same genus as gray wolves. Diverged a really long time ago.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we don't really know why or how they chose the characteristics that they did choose to edit.
It seems
So
to be very visual for the marketing appeal of the whole thing.
right, yeah. So, it's really hard to say. I would be super interested to see if they ever do end up publishing a peer-reviewed study.
Mhm,
I'd be really interested to see, what they decided to change and why.
mm,
But I would be super hesitant to take a look at the animal that they created and make claims about what our
right.
ancestral dogs and wolves might have looked like based off of that.
Yeah. That was kind of what I was getting. Like, does it even it seems
Right.
like the technology involved to do it is fascinating and important to develop, of, like all of the things you can learn en route to, trying to, obviously, like people talk about, like with war, like a lot of invention, random things that we have are inventions that came about from like war process and technological advancement of, they're trying to do this genetic thing, whatever, for marketing, looks cool, people can go and visit, but like the actual technology that's created is useful in other areas, like potentially, even if like there's not
Yeah.
really much to be gleaned from the
Yeah,
animals
I could
themselves.
totally see a world where it's like, this project is more of an exercise and how does this technology work and how can we use it to do
Mm,
things in the future that are beneficial for others.
absolutely.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
feels a
So
little Jurassic Park, right?
it
Kind
feels,
of.
and they're kind
Yeah.
of like, I mean, they're talking about the dodo next. And I'm like, Dodo's fine. Dodo is okay, that sort of thing. The problem is, like, once an animal leaves an ecosystem adapts, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Like, there used to be, I guess, like 2 billion or something carrier pigeons in America that are completely extinct now. And like if you read old like 1800s, 1700s, 1600s accounts of hunting and when, people are going out and trying to get pelts, they talk about like these black clouds of carrier pigeons in the
Right.
sky that are enormous and none to be seen anymore. And like, would it be beneficial to bring it back? Like maybe, I guess, like at what point is an animal no longer, pertinent to an area? I mean, you see this with the
Yeah.
wolves out in Yellowstone and how they're starting to creep out into other areas in surrounding areas. And, you know, you see with like obviously like the elk populations, a lot of them, my understanding is a lot of them are trying to get to Yellowstone because they seem to understand that once they're in Yellowstone, they're no longer in danger of being hunted. They were able to like figure that out, but you
Yeah.
would just introduce this apex predator and think it's all going to be hunky dory.
Right. I mean, we talk a lot about, how do animals evolve, but just like you said, the environment evolves too.
Hmm.
And animals evolve because they're adapting to their environment. And when that environment no longer exists, is there a home for that animal anymore?
Yeah, and how long does that need to go on for? You know,
Yeah.
it kind of depends on like maybe it's better to focus on, trying to just preserve the species that actually exist.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. We got I feel like we have more people trying to find Bigfoot than actually just trying to find like potentially extinct animals that are like maybe there might be one or two still around. Like last one was seen 50 years ago. You might find one. You never know.
I mean,
So,
there are tons of animals that are, on the brink of extinction. You see rhinos, there's
yeah.
that one cetacean that's like similar to a dolphin that I can't remember the name of right now.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, there are a lot of animals that really, really need our help.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of what tools and technologies do we have today that might be able to better, take care of the environment and ecosystems that we have right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such like a big problem of one of my favorite things is permaculture of
Mm-hmm.
establishing micro ecosystems, but it's kind of like a oversimplified of like you can't it's not like I can create like a tropical climate in the
Right.
Northeast somewhere, but you know, just getting more native plants going and trying to reestablish diversity. I was talking to I think she's a PhD now here in Maine, and one of the things she studied was squirrels. And what she found was like as the climate gets warmer, obviously the areas that suit certain trees down south can exist gets more and more north. And what they found was that squirrels, which are a big part of how these trees spread, um, with their nuts and everything, that squirrels will show preference to novel nuts. When they
Oh, very
find a
cool.
new nut, they will prefer the one that they've never seen before, and they end up planting those. And so you see a lot of these trees starting to creep up north and interfere with like ecosystems and all of that sort of thing. And all of that starts to pivot. And it's fascinating that like the squirrel would prefer the new nut for whatever reason. And it's just this
Totally.
impossibly huge ripple effect to try to,
Yeah.
how do you know where that one little change needs to be of like, oh, we're going to plant this or we're going to release that. Like it's trying to play way above our hand, I think, at a certain
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and I think, there are a lot of things that people can do too. Like the National Wildlife Federation has like certification programs to make your garden, your backyard be like a certified wildlife friendly landscape.
Yeah.
And I think that programs like that are just, first off, really cool.
Yeah.
And second off, really important, both for their impact on wildlife and on people.
Absolutely. So you guys talked about a lot about like the co-evolution of humans and dogs. Are there things that you guys have been able to identify or people have been able to identify that exist in human, you guys think because of dogs?
Exist in humans because of dogs. That's a really interesting question. I think, and this is just like me pondering, not
Mm,
based off of work that I've done or anything, but I think that dogs have done a really good job of making us very pro-social.
mm,
By having these, we're pretty unique. There are other animals that keep other animals as well. A lot of insects actually do that. But we keep other animals inside of our homes that we
Right.
don't understand the language of. That's really special. And
Mm.
we wouldn't be able to do that unless we had this really advanced prosociality, empathy, altruism type thing. I mean, I spend thousands of dollars on my dogs with their medical costs and their food and their toys. I'm like a regular at PetSmart. And would I be able to do that if I wasn't a species that was pro-social, that
Mm.
was altruistic? Maybe not perfectly altruistic because I do get benefits from having my animals,
Right.
but I do a lot for them, and so do a lot of other people. So, how much of that is natural versus how much of it came from us working alongside of them for so many years?
Is there any analogous besides like maybe cats, like success that we've clearly had in domestication? Because I would imagine like they've, we have lizards and people keep raccoons and all sorts of things. Like I assume we've tried it with many, many animals over the thousands of years.
Yeah, so there are some like kind of requirements for domestication to happen.
Okay.
So it's really helpful if the animal has, a flexible diet. That's why we don't have domesticated pandas, is because they really kind of only eat one thing. It's a lot easier for us to have a cat or a dog that can eat a
Right.
whole bunch of different stuff. They need to, mature pretty quickly. It's really hard for us to to breed an animal that takes a really long time before it can be used or harvested or breed more. It's another important thing is they need to be able to breed in captivity.
Hmm.
They should be pretty docile. They shouldn't be super panicky. It's why zebras are really hard. You hear stories from zookeepers being like, zebras are the worst animals to care for because they'll, hear a loud noise and they'll, try to flee. So there's a lot of things that make certain animals better to domesticate than others. And that's also where
Hmm.
the difference between domestication and tameness comes in. You
Okay.
can tame an individual. That's why we have, lions in zoos that will cooperate in their veterinary care, but we don't have lions at PetSmart. So, we've certainly tried, and there are some animals that are better at it than others.
Okay.
But I mean, man, what animal has been domesticated better than the dog? To have a
That's
social predator live in our homes. I mean, you see cows and sheep that will grow wool forever, but a sheep won't like eat you. A dog certainly could.
absolutely good. I mean, it's unfortunate, but there's stories every year. I mean, pit bulls are a problem. Pit bulls are a real problem. They are very jousty dogs and, attack people, unfortunately. But
I
that
would
was
push back
exact.
against that a little bit, actually. If you look at the actual, dogs that are more aggressive versus others, pit bulls are really no more aggressive than, a golden
Really?
retriever. Yeah,
Oh,
the whole pit bulls are bred for violence thing. If anything, it's really a predisposition towards dog-directed aggression. Dog-directed aggression and human-directed
oh,
aggression are actually very distinct things.
oh, okay. So there, it's completely a fallacy. It's kind of it's just like socially people say it, and so everyone believes it, but it's
Right.
not.
And you also get into, there's a whole bunch of human psych stuff that goes into it too, of like
Mm,
if you believe it, then every time that you see a dog bit someone, it's a pit bull, you lock that away in the memory
right,
bank. But then you see, a Labrador bit someone, you go, that's weird, and you move on. Uh,
right. And you
and it's
like you.
also, pit bulls are large, strong dogs. How many Shih Tzus bite somebody that send them to the hospital versus a pit bull? So,
That's a great point. That's a great point. I mean, you made another good point earlier that I was just thinking about was like, I don't know, would it be considered domestication of like our farm animals? I would assume it's like the
yes, they're
similar thing
super
of like,
domesticated,
but dogs ended up in this place where like we're not getting eaten, thank God, and
thankfully.
we're like a help. We're part of the help. We're part of the family. Like we've
Yeah.
found this unique niche in the where we're not a farm animal. We're very much helping with the farm. We're part of the farm.
Yeah, and dogs certainly started out as being useful to us, right? We used dogs. They were hunters for us.
Mm,
They were guard dogs. And then somewhere around that kind of 2000-ish year ago range, somewhere around there, we
mhm,
started going, you know what? This is actually now a social status. So people who are very wealthy started breeding dogs to sit on their laps, and that's where we got toy breeds from. Um, and then, the political climate changed and the social climate changed and the world changed. And now we have a gajillion and a half people who say, yeah, my dog is my kid. My dog is my sibling. My fiance will say that, the dog that their family grew up with is the brother. So now I'm, going to be marrying into a family and I have a dog-in-law. You'll have, cattle and pigs and chickens that are domesticated, and some people do consider them part of their family,
Mm.
but not as much as people think of dogs.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard of many pig in-laws or people referring to their pig as their baby.
Right.
But
Yep.
yeah, and I would say the majority of people I know would consider their dog a family member in some capacity. I mean, you see them and they're in family photos, they're in everything, you know.
And
But
there's some researchers who that's what they look at. Like that's their job is to examine dogs as being part of the family.
do we when we look back, do we think like the reason we really hit it off was A, like you said, like diets are kind of similar. They're a bit more carnivore than we are, but a lot more probably. But um, at the same time, like, are we like pretty similar in the sense that like our predator, the things that would prey on us are similar, and the things that we would prey on are kind of similar?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that we don't really have many natural predators at this point.
Yeah.
And dogs don't really either. So we're both kind of pretty apexy predators.
Hmm.
But we've also done a lot of selection on them, and dogs have actually evolved this genetic adaptation that lets them digest corn and other starches. Wolves can't do that. So
Hmm.
throughout domestication, we also created a species that is easier to live with than the ones that we started with.
That's so fascinating. It like it's what are like the kind of the big questions at the moment that are in this space? Like when you if you think about the frontiers of this, like what is
Yeah.
the next 5 to 10 years hopefully going to tell us?
Oh my gosh, that's such an exciting question. I think some of it comes down to uniqueness. What
Okay.
makes dogs unique versus what makes humans unique? That's a pretty interesting question that always kind of gets people's gears going. Another question comes into those feral dogs.
Mm,
At science conferences, every discipline has their conferences. And so I was just at a dog conference in Hamburg, Germany, and people started saying, we need to learn more about those free-ranging dogs.
mm,
They make up a huge proportion of the dogs that are alive today, and we're doing them a disservice by not studying them as much as we should be. So that's a big thing. And then I think that our working dogs, looking at service dogs and what might make them successful and how can we help foster their care. But at the forefront, ahead of all of it, really central is just what makes dogs our best friends. What
mm.
can we learn about them that will make them easier for us to live with, that will make their lives better?
Yeah. I mean, we it's one of those things like every time unfortunately like there are a pet a lot of people say like you buy to kind of teach kids about life of this friend that you
Right, like
know is
teach
not going
responsibility.
right, it's not going to live as long as you are, unfortunately.
Yep.
And I just had this with a cat that passed recently.
Oh, I'm
It was the
sorry.
first time I'd ever had a cat where we put them down. All of our cats had kind of died
Right.
on their own, and so this time we got them. Had cancer, had diabetes, had all these problems, and they were like, "It's time." And they gave them back to us, and we had them for a day.
Yeah.
And I was sort of sitting there thinking, like, you kind of just take them for granted. Like they're just in your life every single day. And, sometimes they're annoying and, they're in your
Yeah.
face and all up in your business and that sort of thing. And then like it comes time where the end comes and it hits you
Mhm.
just as hard as like any person would of this
Yeah.
this huge hole that's in your life. And, you know,
Yeah.
I can think of a lot of other animals that, there's some turkeys I see every single day. There's deer you see every single day. There's all sorts of, animals in your purview, but you don't connect with them
Right.
on any
They
sort of
are
level like that.
part of the family, and the grief that we feel when they die is comparable to that of if we lose a human family member. It
Yeah.
really is. There's research that says that.
Mm,
And a lot of people feel something called disenfranchised grief, which is where the grief is kind of unrecognized or discounted by others. So, if
mm.
your dog dies, you will feel something called disenfranchised grief, where, maybe your employer goes, well, it's just a dog, get back to work. But we really do feel the same for them as we do humans.
Do dogs experience emotions in a similar way to us at all?
It's a really interesting question. It's one that some people are trying to answer. There is kind of a split between what we call basic and advanced emotions.
Okay.
Some people say it's, all animals are capable of feeling like disgust and fear and things like that because it's evolutionarily advantageous. You need to be able to feel disgust if you eat something that is harmful to you because you need to not die after eating rancid meat. But then those other things like grief and, stuff like that, do other animals feel that? That's a really big
Mm.
question. There was some research that came out just a couple of years ago that says that, yeah, dogs do feel grief. They feel grief when other dogs in the family die. So there's some kind of advancing evidence that suggests that they feel some advanced emotions. There's some other evidence that says that they, don't show others. So something like guilt, like the guilty look that dogs give,
The
doesn't
puppy
seem to
dog
actually
guys?
be guilt. It seems to just kind of be more like an adaptation to make you not be mad at them. But, I always come back to this thing of like, is this evidence of absence or absence of evidence? Is
Yeah.
the fact that we don't have that research saying that they really don't feel something like that, or is it just that we don't have a way of measuring it yet?
Oh, listen, those puppy dog eyes get
Yeah,
you. What
they
Rosie
really
love,
do.
one of our dogs, she's so quick with it, but she loves bread and bagels. She's a
Yep.
huge bagel girl, and she will snatch them if you're not paying attention. And she knows, like, I'm gonna take this, and then I gotta go to my kennel and sit there for in timeout. But
Hide for a bit. Yep.
I don't care. But every time she does it, she'll snatch it. She'll go right to her kennel, right to timeout, and then she'll give you the eyes. And it gets you every single time. You're like, I can't be mad at you. I
Yeah.
can't be mad at you. Come on out. You're fine.
Yeah.
Ugh, they're so smart. Oh my gosh.
They
Do
are. And it makes my job so fun.
I bet. Like, what a great job. You just get to hang out with you get to hang out with dingoes too?
I do, yeah. We fly out to Australia, and there's a phenomenal sanctuary down in Tularn Vale that we stay at, and we get to hang out with the dingoes at the sanctuary. And boy, they are different from dogs, I'll tell you. There's just something about them. The owner of the sanctuary likes to say that they're cats in a dog suit with a monkey brain. They're really, really cool animals. So yeah, occasionally we'll go down to Australia. We have a lab right at Boston College that we bring pet dogs into and hang out
Yeah,
with them there. And then sometimes we'll go to like service dog training schools to test the dogs that are in training there.
that's fascinating. How did you get into all of this? How did you end up here?
Yeah, so I always loved dogs. I grew up with dogs. I started doing like 4-H with dogs. I did dog shows. I
Mm,
volunteered at dog rescues, at dog hospitals. I became a puppy raiser for a guide dog organization. And I knew I wanted to do something with dogs. So I went to school and I got my bachelor's in animal behavior from Canisius University. And I thought that I was going to become a dog trainer. That's what I was like, this is what
mm.
I'm doing. I'm going to train service dogs. And then I took a class on animal cognition. And when you read academic journal articles, there's always a spot at the end where it says, this is where the research needs to go next. These are the future directions. This is what scientists have to do to figure out the next questions. And I was reading these articles for class because, that's my homework. And I started circling that little section at the end and writing like me question mark next to it. And I
Oh,
started thinking about like the possibility of doing that. And so I started talking with my professor and I realized that I really love learning new things and I really love asking questions. And what greater joy is there in life than asking questions that nobody has gotten to ask before
mm,
and learning things that nobody has learned before?
yeah.
So, how do you do that? You go off into research. So, I started applying for PhD programs and I got into Boston College, and I've been overjoyed with my job ever since.
That's so cool. Is there like a big Like, if you could study one thing or, get to the bottom of one thing right now, what would it be for you?
Right now, it's kind of that service dog question. Like I said,
Gotcha.
I volunteered with service dog organizations. I still do. The puppy that I have
Mhm,
right now is a puppy in training for an organization.
mhm,
And so I'm always kind of looking for ways of merging that personal passion for service dogs with
mhm,
my, academic passion for research. And so I do have a project right now that I'm trying to kind of get off the ground that is looking at what makes a service dog special.
mhm,
And so kind of doing some of that research to see maybe is there some kind of test that we can do to figure out early on what dog might make it. And then can we do an intervention for the ones that don't do well on that test
mhm.
to kind of help support them?
Is that really the biggest issue with service animals at the moment? Is just this very low 50% failure or very high 50% failure rate, low success rate?
Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, if you look at the service dog literature, that's kind of the thing that everyone kind of comes back to is saying, this is the issue in the literature that needs to be fixed is what is it that's making it be so low.
Hmm.
It also does help that when you're applying for grants to fund your research, a lot of those grants will ask what is the impact on humans. So it's really
Mm,
easy to be able to say this research is beneficial because it will help us figure out what service dogs need.
hmm.
So part of it is just the lens through which we have to approach research in order to get the money to be able to do it.
Gotcha.
But part of it is, this is a really big question is how can we make it so that more dogs can be successful?
Do you think there's an expansion of what service dogs would be able to service potentially, or like untapped markets that dogs could be serviced in?
It's a really interesting question. I can't really think of anything that, a service dog could do that isn't currently being used to do that for. I mean, we
Mm,
have service dogs for people with mobility disabilities, with psychiatric disabilities, with blindness, hearing loss,
yeah.
or hearing impairment, I should say.
Mm,
So, we see that dogs are able to learn those skills. I read this metaphor once online that was like, what would a helpful robot do that would help mitigate the impacts of your disability? And, you think about your disability that you have and you think about
right.
what a helpful robot would do. And then you start asking yourself, okay, what thing can that helpful robot do that you can teach a dog to do? The answer is really a lot. I mean, you get
Yeah.
service dogs that will, load your laundry for you, that will help carry your grocery basket for you, that
Mhm.
will wake you up from a nightmare. So they're
Yeah.
really, really special animals.
Do we think that like some dogs, I'm correct, can like smell, like they can detect seizures coming on, they can all this
Yeah.
sort of thing. Do we think that is something that's like a domestication thing of just like they figured it out?
Ooh, I don't know if it's a domestication thing or if it's like their noses are just so dang powerful that they're able to recognize it. And when we figured out, we play nose work games with dogs and know that their noses are really strong. So someone at one point had the thought of, you know what, let's see if this dog can smell the difference between someone with low versus normal blood sugar. And it turns out that they can.
That's it's so crazy that they can do that.
Yeah,
And
one of the puppies I raised, Butterscotch, she didn't like the guide dog equipment, but she was a really good service dog candidate, so she
uh,
became a diabetic alert dog instead.
that's so cool. Do you guys ever work with like rescue dogs or, first responder dogs?
Yeah, so as researchers, a lot of our dogs are rescue dogs that come into our lab and play our games. Some of the dogs that we have come in from breeders, they've been rescued and adopted, and so we have a lot of rescue dogs. There are other research labs that look at like first responder dogs and other kind of working dogs. There's the Penn Vet Working Dog Center does a lot of that kind of work,
Okay.
which is super fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
When it comes to service dogs, there are even some organizations that will use like rescue dogs and try to train them up to be service dogs, but they have a even lower success rate than other organizations
I
do.
was just about to ask about like the plasticity, and specifically the neuroplasticity of dogs. Like, what is that? What is that drop off? Like we talk about it here a lot. Like Rosie's pretty good, but Lily is very anxious, and she's not very responsive to her name and that sort of thing. And at what point is it sort of like she is how she's gonna be?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, you can teach a dog new tricks. A dog
Mm,
can learn, I like to say anything with a brain can learn. And so there is that, you get socialization periods in dogs that happen, you get fear periods. They usually kind of plateau out around like 2-ish years old, depending on the breed.
mhm.
Um, but there really isn't a limit to when a dog stops learning.
Gotcha. What do you guys look have has anyone looked into like COVID dogs at all? Because we have
Yeah.
COVID kids and Lily is a COVID dog, was born in the thick of it. And because of that, we weren't really able to walk her, weren't able to take her out to the park, and she has had almost no dog socialization for her first year of life. Like obviously her litter, which she was socialized with, and then we took her right as soon as she was able to be taken. And
Right.
she's been with Rosie ever since. And when we would take them and drop them off at a lady who babysits dogs and dog sits, um, the feedback would always come back the same of Rosie's awesome. The dogs love Rosie. She loves them. Lily does not play well with others. She is very intense.
Oh.
She goes very hard, and dogs don't want to play with her because she just takes it to the extreme too much. And we had wondered always, like, is that just because, she kind of grew up in a weird time?
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of like, if you aren't seeing a whole bunch of people and other dogs when they're in those critical socialization and fear periods, there are kind of going to be consequences. And there
Mm,
were booming dog adoptions during social isolation when COVID happened.
mm,
Um, that said, there's a lot of, individual differences too. It could be that she just happens to be a more introverted dog, and your other dog is just more extroverted. There are personality differences between dogs.
yeah.
So there is some research going on. Our lab isn't involved in it, but there are some people that are kind of curious about
Mm.
what happened during the pandemic and what happened to the dogs that grew up during that time.
How well are humans and dogs able to meet their social needs just off of each other? Because I feel
Very
like,
well.
well, yeah, because I feel like whenever you read about like this hermit who lived off in the mountains somewhere by themselves, you think,
Right.
how were you on your own for that long? Well, they had a dog. They usually have like a couple dogs with them,
Yeah.
or you know, you see people are obviously able to. I mean, like you guys were talking about, like a lot of our pro-social behavior, like you think, probably comes, as you said, like potentially from dogs too.
Yeah, I mean, humans and dogs are both social animals, and it turns out that we can get that social interaction from each other.
Mm,
We form, like we've kind of alluded to, we form attachments to dogs, and dogs form attachments to us that can be measured and are similar to human, parent-child or caregiver-child relationships. So we absolutely can. And I've known people who have had dogs are like, yeah, my dog isn't really a dog's dog. They don't really need other dog interactions the way that, some others might, but
yeah.
boy, do they love people.
Ah. So, if you could give people like a quick bullet list of like these are common things you see or you hear with dogs, whether it's something with how to train them or that sort of thing that are just like misconceptions of like, yeah, don't do that, stop doing this, this needs to stop. Maybe things that irk you. What would those things be?
Yeah, I would say dogs are our best friends for a reason. They have evolved for thousands of years to love us, and we've evolved alongside them to love them. They're not trying to spite you. They're not trying to, do anything mean to you. They just want to be your friend. And so the best thing that you can do for your dog is just to be their friend and love them and train them positively and to be curious about their behaviors and try to answer questions and give them a happy, fulfilling life because they fulfill our lives. So we should do the best that we can to fulfill theirs.
I think that's a beautiful message to end on. Thank you so, so much for coming on. This was so fascinating.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
can you just let people know if they want to like follow up with you guys or reach out to you guys or get in contact with you guys, where to do that?
Absolutely. So you can Google Boston College Canine Cognition Center and we'll pop right up.
Mm.
People can get involved if they live in the Boston area. They can bring their dogs in and we'll play some fun games with them and learn how they think. But there are also a lot of other really fantastic cognition centers around the country, around the world. So take a look, see if there are any near you. And there are also some that do virtual studies. So if you have a dog at home, you can check out if there are surveys for you to take, if there are Zoom studies for you to do with other labs. But yeah, definitely check us out, learn about the kind of research that we do, learn about the students that we have, the dogs that we learn about, the dingoes that we play with, and ask a lot of questions. And I think you'll find that the answers are really fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Sam. I've appreciated it.
All
Great
right.
talking with you.
Bye, everybody.